Hi everyone, Dee from Homestead Rewind. Today's pretty chilly outside, not like our nice warm weather we had last week. So I decided I'm going to make a pot of homemade chicken noodle soup. Come along with me and I'll show you how. Now, before we get started making soup, I want to talk about how I buy chicken. I always buy my chicken in the bulk, when it's on sale especially. You can get some really good deals if you just watch the sale paper and buy that chicken when it's cheap. If you don't have time when you get home, make sure you get it straight into the refrigerator. You want to keep that chicken cold. When you get time, pull your chicken out, wrap it up in saran wrap, and put it in a Ziploc bag. I usually try to use my chicken out of the freezer within 3 months because it seems like it begins to start freezer burning on me. That's just my particular freezer. Yours might be different. Now, when I make homemade chicken noodle soup, 2 leg quarters is about the perfect size for our family. I'm adding vegetables to my chicken noodle soup every time. It's just a little trick I have to get them to eat their veggies. So the first thing that you want to do is take your chicken right straight out of the freezer. You don't even have to let it thaw. And put it in a pan, fill it completely up with water, and turn it on high and bring it to a boil. After it gets to a boil, you want to turn it down and let it simmer. And I usually let mine simmer for at least an hour and sometimes more. I'll let you know how I check to see whenever it's ready. So, to make homemade egg noodles, you only really need 3 different ingredients: flour, milk, and eggs. Step 1 is to beat up them eggs. Beat them up really, really good. Make sure you get the yolks pretty incorporated with your whites. And I add about 1/4 cup of milk. Now, my grandma used to use just plain old flour with her egg noodles, and that actually is the way that I was taught how to do it. I don't even really remember if my grandma put baking powder or any other kind of leavening in that flour. I just remember her always saying, you need 1 egg yolk, a 1/2 shell of water, and flour. And that's how she made hers. But I use self-rising flour. And I'm going to start out with a cup in my pan here. 1 cup of self-rising flour. I'm sure I'm going to need more than that before this is over. And I'm just going to pour my mixture in there, my egg and milk mixture. Stir that up really good. You can see it's starting to come together now. Add a little more flour. So now I'm up to a 1/2 cup. It's just a guessing game. It depends on the size of your eggs. So you just want to add a little flour at a time. Now you can see that it really is forming a dough in there. One thing about making noodles is you cannot be afraid of making a mess. Just take it that you're going to make a mess right off the bat. Now, after you once get it to stick together, then you want to add a little more flour. In this case, I'm adding a 1/2 cup of flour. And I'm switching from my wire whip to a spatula now. And I'm going to use my spatula to knead that in. Just so it's not quite so sticky and wet. That's all you're doing. You want to try to keep it as soft as possible. I don't really like to work my homemade noodles up too much because I feel like that makes them tough. Once you have your dough mixed to where it holds the ball form, it's still going to be slightly sticky, and you have to move on to your hands then. So I'm laying down some parchment paper now because I'm going to need to move my noodles. Being that I'm in the camper, I'm going to need this counter space to chop up my vegetables and get them going for the rest of the soup. So I'm laying down the parchment paper. I'm just going to pull this out. I'm just going to slightly knead it a bit until you can handle the dough without it sticking too bad. You do want enough flour in there that it holds together. So, another 1/2 cup of flour. And I'm just going to roll this out. And we usually roll it out, about 1/8 of an inch thick. Just turn it over. And space is limited in the camper, but we're making it work. Just want to gently roll it out. And sometimes when you're rolling, if it's pulling back, it helps to just give it a few seconds to relax, and then you continue on rolling it out. Once you get your dough to the desired thickness that you think you want for your noodles, I just go ahead and cut a square. Rada, this is a Rada pizza cutter, by the way. Love the thing. Love my Radas. Squish that up, put it to the side. And then I just start cutting my noodles. And it's really preference on how you want the size and the shape of these noodles. That's all in your own preference. Now, once you've got your noodles all cut out, I've got this flat cookie sheet that's going to help support my parchment paper as I move them. And I'm just going to put them in a dry place and let them dry out some. Okay, now that I've got the noodles done and they're drying, they will have plenty of time to dry while I continue working on the rest of the soup. The chicken is still cooking. I can smell it. It smells so good. It's making lots of yummy broth for our soup right now. Let's talk about the vegetables. First of all, I want to talk about these carrots, my hairy carrots. They were on sale a couple months ago when I went to the store, and so I bought quite a few of them. And this time of year, carrots normally will keep really well in the lower part of your refrigerator, and as long as they stay cold and don't get a whole lot of light. But this time of year, they sometimes grow little roots off of the carrot. So that's not a bad carrot, guys. It's a good carrot. It's still good. You just I have this peeler. It's a Rada peeler, of course, but you can use whatever you've got at home. This is just my favorite. They cut so well. And very thin, too. Not taking off any more than what I really need for my carrot. Still saving my carrot. I went outside and picked some of my celery. Remember the celery that I cut all of the long stalks off, stuck it in water, it grew roots, and I put it in my dirt outside in my camper garden? I'm getting to use some of that celery. It smells so good. I use garlic. We use a lot of garlic in this house. We love garlic. And for this soup, I'm going to use 3 cloves of garlic. Okay, so this is how I go about cleaning my garlic cloves. I just take my meat pounder and smash them. By the way, I have a flat side on my meat pounder. I got the rib side and the flat side. I know you guys see me pounding on that cabbage the other day in my other video that I did, and probably wondered how I was keeping from poking holes in it. I do have a flat side on my meat pounder. And once you crack that open, it's pretty easy, fairly easy, to peel that skin off. It wants to stick to your hands. Now, to get all these vegetables chopped up.
She's waiting for love to be I'll send her my heart covered as a gift, and hope that you'll take it into her side. La 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 la.
Adding the vegetables makes a really hearty soup, especially if you cook them down before you put them in your soup. So I will put these in a pan pretty soon and saute them, and it'll make a really hearty soup. Okay, the chicken actually ended up cooking for about 2 hours on this stove in the camper. And I'm going to check, it's ready to check now. Here's how I check to see. If the bone falls out like that, it's ready. And I just remove the chicken from the broth and it's going to sit over here and cool. Yeah, that's really falling apart. It'll be easy to debone that way. Now, while the chicken is cooling, I'm going to set my broth to the side. And I'm going to cook up the vegetables. I'm going to add about 2 tablespoons of butter. And I have that on really low heat, by the way. Let that butter melt down a little bit. And I'm going to pour all my vegetables in there. Typically I use more celery, but this celery that I'm growing in my camper garden is very strong celery compared to what you buy at the store. So I thought I'd probably better tone that down a little bit. We're just going to let those vegetables cook down a little bit. Now I have sage growing outside in my camper garden, but it's not quite big enough for me to start picking off of yet. But you can see that I'm using, this is whole leaf sage that I got in the bulk. I keep it in my cabinet all the time just in case I'm out of sage, because I always have sage and basil in the summertime, but in the winter in the camper I don't have the fresh sage. And I'm going to sprinkle that into, go ahead and get it started into my chicken broth that I have there. I'm adding about a teaspoon of onion powder. I don't like to use the onions in my chicken noodle soup. I just don't like their texture in there. It's also at this time that I add my salt and pepper to my chicken broth. I like to control how much salt I put in my food, so I'm only putting about a teaspoon in there. And I use sea salt more than anything. Sea salt or Himalayan salt. Okay, so now the chicken is cooled down enough to where I can touch it, and I'm just going in and pulling off the meatiest part of the chicken. Taking the bones out of it. And literally it is just falling apart where I can just pull that meat right off of the bone. Now while I'm deboning the chicken, I want to talk about another way that you can do this. I've had quite a bit of time invested today, but I had the time to invest. If I hadn't have had, I would have done the same thing with this chicken. Take it straight out of the freezer and put it in the crock pot covered with water, turn it on high, and leave it there all day. And when I get home, my chicken would be ready to go, and so would my broth. Especially if I made the egg noodles the night before, because they can set and dry overnight. I'll finish getting this deboned, and I'll be right back with you. Once you have your chicken deboned, you want to take a knife and just run it through. I don't like big chunky pieces. Some people might. My family likes chunks, but they don't like big chunks. So I just cut it down just a little bit. Now, I'm getting so many ingredients that my original pot that I boiled the chicken in is not going to be big enough. So I'm moving up to a bigger pot. I'll put all my chicken in there. And leftover broth that drained off the chicken. stray cats are gonna love me tonight. And I'm gonna pour my broth in there. Now, I'm going to return this back to the heat and get it to a hard rolling boil. Okay, my chicken and my vegetables and my broth are boiling very hard. Now, I want you to see how much those noodles have shrunk just in a couple hours since I made them. They really did shrink down good, but they'll continue to shrink down if you leave them out. I'm only going to need about half of these noodles for this particular meal. The rest of them are going to go in my dehydrator. Now you want to go slow because you want to make sure that you continue to boil as you're dropping these noodles in. You don't want the temperature to go down so low that it quits boiling. And it will go down some because even though they're room temperature, they will cool off your soup. So I just put them in one at a time, making sure it's still boiling. Sometimes after your process of boiling and bringing to a boil, you lose some of your water. If that happens to you, go ahead and pour a cup of water in, and if you have some bouillon on hand, go ahead and put a bouillon in there as well. One bouillon, 1 cup of water. I don't know if you can see that from where I have the camera this time, but the noodles, as they cook, float to the top. Once you get all of your noodles in your pot, go ahead and put a lid on it and turn it way down to low and let it simmer for a while. In about 20 minutes, you'll have homemade chicken noodle soup from scratch. Well, I think that's about it for me for today. It's coffee time. There's quite a bit of work being done at the homestead, and I'm going home this week to check on it. I will be having videos of the progress that we're making on our homestead rewind. As you can see, I'm still working on mastering skills that I'm going to need to use when I return to my homestead. All cooking from scratch, and hopefully then I will have my own food to cook. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching. Love and